So, Leila, thank you very much for making time to share your insights into the future of leadership. But before we walk into the future, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Where did you grow up?
Thank you, Nick. It's absolutely lovely to chat to you today. I grew up in Johannesburg. My background is that I come from a very large family. I actually have, I'm one of 10 siblings. So I didn't grow up with all of my siblings, but that is quite a unique characteristic that not many people know about me. And when you grow up in a large family, you learn to communicate, you learn compromise, and we didn't grow up in a family with enormous wealth. And so compromise and learning to be creative becomes a part of your DNA. And that was a very important foundational element in defining who I am and really molding my leadership structure and my leadership DNA.
And Leila, can you tell us what was your dream career when you grew up?
Well, Nick, a year before I was born, the US sent Armstrong to the moon, and I was obviously very intrigued by that as I became conscious and grew up and became aware of that. And so I was always very keen to become an astronaut. Needless to say, I didn't do that, but that I found very curious, and the science behind getting people onto the moon and possibly even other planets has always piqued my interest. So as a kid, I always wanted to become an astronaut.
Interesting, very much like Erasmus Peter.
Yes.
And tell us, who inspired you in your early days?
As I've said, science has always been a curious part of my perspective, and so I'd say the person who inspired me outside of my family circle would be Madame Curie. So she, as we all know, won not only one but 2 Nobel Prizes. And my mom had her book when I was growing up, and I read it multiple times. My mom subsequently given me that book, and she became an iconic representation of success. I remember parts in the book where, for example, she would go into her lab late at night because she had children, and she discovered radium because it was glowing in the dark, and she came in at night. Had she been working like most other scientists during the day, there was a lower likelihood that she would have discovered radium as she did. She was also a tremendous inspiration around how she went about her studies. Her and her sister had agreed that they would support one another through their studies, and she worked as a governess or housekeeper, and used that money to pay for her sister to study. And it took 5 years before she could then study. And you can imagine the tremendous give up and the tremendous sacrifice that she made as a potential Nobel laureate winner to work as a housekeeper. And so she really achieved against great odds. She was a Polish Jew and also had many social constructs and social norms against her in her ability to study in what was previously largely a male-dominated field. And so she really represented success for me as a child.
Right. Now, Leila, I believe you started your career at Accenture. You then joined Standard Bank, the JSE, the Australian Payments Network, and then came back to the JSE. Looking back over your career, can you maybe share a couple of highlights?
I've had highlights throughout my career, and possibly those highlights that are most meaningful for me are interpersonal moments. And there is a Greek word that captures that. It's called kairos, moments that matter. And the moments that really matter for me in my career are where I've made a genuine contribution to the growth and development of somebody else. You know, doubling the profit or introducing new, very successful products, repositioning a company. Those are all great things, but people very quickly forget. But what people don't forget is how you made them feel and what contribution you made in their career growth trajectory. I was presenting at a Standard Bank conference to the call centers, and one of the girls boldly came up to me and said, "Please, will you mentor me?" And I mentored her, and she, at the time, was working night shift because she was studying during the day, and she was also funding her brother who had been orphaned, and she was supporting him financially to get through school. And you can imagine the kind of pressure that that put her under. And so I used to meet with her regularly, and ironically, I probably learned more from her than she did from me. But it was tremendously gratifying to see that after I'd left the bank, she then took on a meaningful role in marketing and grew her career quite substantially. And those sorts of stories and those sorts of experiences are so much more meaningful than grand success experiences. I think sometimes success can make you over-calibrated, and it can create hubris and create a sense that takes you away from reality. And one always needs to remind oneself of one's roots and become grounded in what really matters. And in some ways, in many ways, the pandemic has done just that. It's taken us back as a reversion to our basic values.
So, Leila, what would you say is driving you today?
What is driving me today is, and I took a very alternative, unorthodox decision to come back to South Africa after spending 3 marvelous years in Australia, and I was successful and very much enjoyed my roles in Australia. And the reason that I came back is really what is driving me today is that as you get older in your career, linear success that social constructs define in very limited ways is not actually that important. What really drives me is to make a difference that's really bigger than myself, and so to make a contribution to either the people around me or society. The JSE is very much a proxy for the broader macroeconomy, and the ability to use this leadership role to improve certain aspects of our society is a very compelling thing. For example, we lead on the sustainability front. I co-chair a very important forum with the United Nations, which is a hand-selected group of the top 30 CEOs globally, including the group CEO of UBS, Citi, Bank of America, ICBC, etc., PIMCO. And it's really a great privilege to have a South African and female leading on the sustainability agenda. We do a lot locally in contributing and supporting government in the sustainable initiatives, and we've also recently launched a number of very important projects that support not only the climate change element but also the social element, which is fighting inequality, ensuring that we've got gender pay parity, gender equality. And so we do that through products and policies and frameworks, but we also do that through really embracing those principles within the JSE and making sure that everything that we do takes account of our impact on both society and the environment. And those are really crucial dynamics for me, very important to leave a legacy that has a lasting and meaningful effect on things that really matter.
Now, looking into the future, Leila, what does the future of leadership mean to you?
I think we are at an inflection point. I think the social constructs that have defined what leadership principles should be embraced of the past have been changed. We've come through an unprecedented period prior to COVID of calm, of relatively low volatility, And since the pandemic, we've seen value systems, we've seen modus operandi up in the air and completely shifting. So not only are the values of employees and customers changing and demanding a different style of leadership, but the events have caused us to be anti-fragile. So I think there are two dynamics to the future of leadership. Firstly, we have to embrace and accept the acceleration of change in our environments, whether it's an acceleration to a more digital environment, vertical uptake trajectory of those sort of digital ways of interacting, or whether it's just simply the change in the leadership profile. No longer is a command and control, top-down hubris, and in some instances what could be perceived as more arrogant or more dominant leadership accepted. We've seen the rise of a number of female leaders through the pandemic who have demonstrated that what was previously seen as soft skills like empathy, building trust, building personal relationships, considering social elements in society that matter, those elements have become much more at the forefront. The sustainability wave has also changed the value system of employees and customers, and they want to know that the environment, the social dynamics, and even governance are managed in a way that's congruent with their value system. So I think we are seeing quite a change, and leaders need to understand that change. They need to become a lot more adaptable, and they need to take what is more of a multivariate type approach to leadership. And I'll use a statistical term, bootstrapping ideas. So use the people around you and crowd in support rather than a sort of top-down command and control, where people are open to failure, they're open to new ideas, and moving from what I think in some instances might have become a mindset of stasis, because everything was a lot more predictable before the pandemic. Of course, we had economic cycles and we had a couple of crises, but nothing in comparison to what we've experienced over the past 3 years. And so I think moving from this concept of stasis to a mindset of growth is really important, and that is growth on all dimensions, not just bottom line growth. It's growth of society, it's growth of individuals' minds and careers, and of course growth of the overall company.
Right. And Leila, what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders, empowering future leaders?
I've learned that, and I think this is the benefit of age and experience. I've learned that what I thought was important in my formative years when I was building a career is actually much less important, and young leaders tend to focus on outward success. They can be quite linear in their thinking, and for me what is much more important is learning, growing and developing. In fact, Satya Nadella, the Microsoft CEO, who has turned Microsoft around and had a profound impact on market cap, when he joined the company, said to the staff that he wants to change Microsoft from being, and I'm loosely quoting him, from being an organization that knows a lot to an organization that learns a lot. So the first learning or lesson for me has been that growth, development and learning take precedence over career hierarchy climbing and salary. That's probably the most important learning for me. And then the other element, which I suspect a lot of females would resonate with, is back yourself. Be confident in your abilities. Women, and I myself as a junior leader, often second guessed myself. I lacked confidence, and I'm not sure why we do that. I think the social constructs with which we grow up tends to question the credibility and the validity of female leaders. And we always tend to second guess ourselves much more, and I'm generalizing grossly, but than our male counterparts. And so the ability to back yourself and to be confident in your view without being without losing the humility and the openness to new ideas, I think was a very important lesson for myself.
Now, Leila, these are challenging times, and what is your advice for future leaders? What type of challenges should they expect to encounter in their career?
And I think we are living in a much faster paced environment, and the challenges that we face are often much more of a global phenomenon than a local contextual phenomenon. Yes, there is always a lot going on in each country's local context, and South Africa is a vibrant society with much uncertainty on a macroeconomic and political basis, and we've experienced this over the last sort of 3 decades. We're experiencing this right now as we speak. And so I would say that what's important is to be flexible in one's mindset, to understand that things like technology have opened the borders of our mind. They've opened the constructs that we thought were risks and turned those into opportunities. And they've in many ways democratized the ability to succeed. So smaller organizations, smaller speedboats have an ability to gain traction and to succeed in a world that was previously, where previously the barriers to entry were profound. And so I would say the changes are, don't take things for granted, and don't think in a linear, logical way always. Sometimes things are illogical. Sometimes the transformation that we see in technology and in business models is unexpected, comes from the line of unexpected. So we've got to learn to dance on a moving carpet in some ways and become anti-fragile, learn to thrive in what many people would perceive as chaos. And also be bold enough to understand that failure is a part of your development and innovation cycle. So I'd say those are probably some of the key points.
Now, Leila, if you were to design a curriculum for future leaders, what are some of the new skills you would want to factor in?
I would say, firstly, there is a precedent or a requirement for diversity, and by that I mean ability diversity, I mean cognitive diversity, gender diversity, and really thinking across all spheres of experience. I'd say also there is a fine balance in the need for leaders to give strong top-down direction and also to have a bottom-up approach where one is humble enough to accept insights from other people, where there is a level of empathy and a level of consideration broader than simply the bottom line. The requirement now of the expectation now of leaders to deliver on issues much wider than the sphere of their organizational delivery. So the impact on the environment, the impact on social dynamics in society are crucial. Our big minds are focused much more on what is their environment doing to the mining the community within their mine environment. Banks are focused, are under huge fire around, are you funding the right assets? The stock exchange itself has to consider what's going on in our environment. We've completely opened up our business model, creating a private market which will give breath and give life to SME development, which was previously never part of a public market. And so understanding our impact on the environment is so crucial, and I think that's going to be a critical success factor.
And Leila, looking back over your leadership journey and maybe your learning journey, are there any role models of leadership that you've encountered and that future leaders should learn from?
I think there are a number of leaders that I've really learned from, and I'd say two of them that I can maybe think of is Marcus Aurelius, and that was really during the Antonine Plague. I had enormous respect, and I researched him quite extensively during the pandemic, and the characteristics that he displayed. During the plague, he chose to stay in the city when everybody had fled. He took his wife's jewelry, melted it down, sold the gold, and used that to support people. He stayed at the bedside of many people on their deathbed and supported them. And he also, unfortunately and sadly, tragically, succumbed to the plague himself. And so his sort of leadership journey represented the ultimate embracing of what was going on around him. He was present, he was visible, and he was involved. That was a tremendous inspiration for me. The other leader that I've always held in very high regard is Shackleton. As you no doubt know, Shackleton was a explorer, and he did a lot in the world of adventure. I'm personally an adventurer and rock climber and spend as much time in nature, and so he really his leadership style was very impressive. He had planned to traverse the Antarctica, and his ship was caught in ice, and he led all of his people through treacherous conditions and through a dinghy, and lost none of them purely through his leadership skills. And you can imagine, if we think managing through a pandemic or a major global crisis is a challenging thing, Maslow's hierarchy, determines that when it's your life and death situation, the odds are stacked much higher. And he made some difficult calls, he was decisive, and he included everybody in his approach to solving that problem. And they traversed over a very long period of time, and he never lost anybody. He didn't achieve his ultimate goal, which I think is often more important and more profound. And many Harvard and Oxford and many other Ivy League colleges use his journey as an important lesson in leadership. So I think we can often find lessons from repackaged knowledge, from experiences outside of our linear, normal working environment to learn the important dynamics of leadership.
And Leila, how can our listeners connect with you, and where should they follow you?
Well, I am on Twitter. I'm not a really huge Twitterati person. My other social media channels are private, just for family and close friends. But I'd say LinkedIn and Twitter are probably good places to connect with me. And then there are many public interactions that I do, whether it's interviews or podcasts like this, or panels with various institutions.
Right. And last but not least, Leila, what is your message to the millions of learners out there who are now finishing school, looking to start their career? What are maybe one or two success factors they should keep in mind?
I would say, firstly, back yourself. Don't doubt yourself, and don't constrain what you think you can do. I was always very tentative and very conservative around the opportunities that I put my name forward for. South Africa has a wonderful mercurial entrepreneurial approach to careers, and we value and respect repackaged knowledge. In the UK and the US, people are super specialists. They don't get to experience new careers for which they might not have the skills, and so embrace that. Also, working really hard in the beginning of your career, particularly. Of course, you end up working hard throughout your career, but especially in the beginning, and not taking yourself too seriously is a really important characteristic that a mentor of mine taught me, and I was quite serious about everything that I had to do at work. And it's actually not always that serious, and sometimes just building relationships and having fun is as important as that midnight delivery that we do.
Well, Leila, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom into the future of leadership and shining such a bright light in this world.
Thank you, Nick. It's absolutely lovely to chat to you and lovely to chat to the listeners.
Thank you.